The following documentary deals with subjects that may upset certain members in the audience, as it presents possible interpretations of historic facts. The conclusions presented here are a matter of opinion. The evidence is real. In the late 15th and early 16th century, there lived a fascinating man, an inventor, an artist, a dreamer. His unmistakable brushstroke created the most magnificent and enigmatic works of art the world has ever seen. His powerful imagination came up with astonishing inventions, pushing the creative power of man to the limit. Leonardo da Vinci, art and science, inspiration and knowledge. The result is the most unexpected irreverence, the most intimate secret expressed in his most famous work. A revelation that will ensure that we shall never see the face we thought we knew in the same way. Mona Lisa, the smile that holds a secret.
The Mona Lisa is, without a doubt, one of the greatest works in the history of Western art. How many opinions have been voiced about it? How many times has it been reproduced, counterfeited, and stolen in more than 5 centuries? There is, however, a final truth waiting to be discovered. A certainty guarded within her smile like a hidden treasure. And the search for this truth will take us to the key to Leonardo's life. A life spent searching for unobtainable perfection. A life that in 1503 encapsulated the most wondrous ambitions possible to man. To fly, crossing the sky like a bird, and an even stranger chimera, to create the perfect union of male and female within a single being. The Mona Lisa is Leonardo's greatest work. It's nothing new to call it the most famous portrait in the world. Her name has reached the greatest heights in the history of art. Her smile has inspired and educated artists throughout history, as well as immortalizing her creator as a master of his art. And yet, with one question, we can unravel any certainty we might think we possess about this work. And that question is, where is it now? The answer might seem obvious, hanging in the Louvre in Paris. But what if we were to say that this wasn't true?
The Mona Lisa was painted between 1503 and 1505 in Florence. Francesco del Giocondo commissioned the portrait of his wife, 20 years his junior, whom he had married some years before. For Leonardo, this was not just another commission. Undertaking this portrait of Mona Lisa was, for him, a riveting experience, only rivaled by his desire to fly, an old yearning that, in those years, was to become an obsession.
Little by little, his dream of flying and this enormously important portrait will become the focus of his life. 2 projects that will become his greatest goals. On the one hand, to see the world from above and discover the secrets of the birds. On the other, to paint a portrait containing symbols that encapsulate the very essence of the human being. Symbols that transcend time and its limitations.
Leonardo da Vinci met Mona Lisa in 1503, the same year when he was immersed in creating his flying machine. His obsession with flying tormented him. Each time he observed the fluttering of birds, he became more and more eager to imitate them. To rise up to the sky, to look down from there at the world, was an image that had obsessed him since childhood.
He divided his time between his flying machines and Lisa's sittings. At the time, she was only 24 years old, and Leonardo was over 50. To work with her, he happily interrupted his calculations about the wind and the density of air. The two had an instant rapport. Legend has it that when the artist painted the young woman, she had just lost a child and was deeply unhappy. An ungraspable and distant sadness of the soul that the artist tried to capture and express on the canvas. It was one of the few times that he didn't interrupt one of his projects to start another.
More down to earth, Mona Lisa's husband had hired musicians to gladden his wife's days and entertain her while the artist was at work. This was customary at the time to relieve the ennui of posing, a burden caused, perhaps, by the unease of being eternalized on canvas. Leonardo da Vinci's biographers have not been able to pinpoint why the artist became so obsessed with Lisa. But there is speculation that their relationship changed the day she told him that she was 24 years old. Through the workings of a mysterious alchemy, Lisa became the reincarnation of Albiera, Leonardo's adoptive mother, with whom he had been so happy in Vinci. It is said that they looked very much alike, but what sealed their connection was their age. Albiera had passed away at 24, Lisa's age at that time.
Perhaps every time that Leonardo looked at Lisa, he saw his mother. One thing was for certain. For some reason, the artist could never be parted from that mysterious canvas. He would carry it with him until the end of his days. This opens up another issue, and one that is just the beginning in a maze of complex questions. If this was a commissioned portrait, why did Leonardo never give it to its rightful owner? Why did he keep it with him until the end of his days? There are dozens of theories, none of them completely satisfying.
Spellbound by the beauty of the painting, painters and biographers from Leonardo's time produced copious notes and sketches. The most transcendent commentaries include those of Giorgio Vasari, contemporary biographer of Da Vinci, and other Renaissance painters. 3 decades after Leonardo's death, Vasari was the first person to call the painting Mona Lisa, from Madame Lisa. The famous biographer relates that when Da Vinci left Florence, he did not take the unfinished portrait with him to the castle of Clou in France, where he ended his days. But Antonio de Beatis, who visited Leonardo in Clou in 1517, unambiguously states in his travel diary that the artist had 3 pieces with him in his final days: John the Baptist, Saint Anne, and a portrait of a mysterious Florentine lady. That is the painting that hangs today in the Louvre.
2 clearly contradictory accounts, a controversy that no one has been able to clear up. Did Leonardo take the Mona Lisa with him to France, or did he leave it unfinished here in Florence? Perhaps both things occurred. And this is where a single enigma becomes 2. Could there be 2 pieces with the same name? One lost, and the other in the Louvre. Which of the 2 is the real Mona Lisa? Let's take a closer look. The description of the Mona Lisa in Vasari's biography contains specific features that do not coincide with the painting in the Louvre. Indeed, there's a tiny detail that becomes quite clear evidence: Mona Lisa's eyebrows. The biography praises the natural way Mona Lisa's eyebrows emerge from her skin in perfect harmony with her every pore. The same account mentions a powerful stare, extenuated by her eyelashes. That is to say, that her eyebrows and eyelashes are crucial to the portrait's realism. Let's take a look at the painting. Where are the eyebrows
in the famous version in the Louvre.
The painting in the Louvre has neither eyebrows nor eyelashes. To explain this, some critics have tried to argue that they became erased due to the poor state of repair of the painting over the centuries. However, X-ray studies recently performed on every layer of the painting in the Louvre have determined that this piece never had eyebrows nor eyelashes, and that it has been perfectly well preserved.
The evidence becomes conclusive. Two pieces with the same name, with very different destinies. On the one hand, a faithful portrait of the young Mona Lisa, also known as Gioconda, wife of Giocondo. This unfinished portrait of a young lady with eyebrows and eyelashes stayed in Florence. On the other hand, a second painting, the famous work of a subject with no facial hair, considered one of the greatest pieces of art in history. The one that Leonardo preferred and gazed on in his final days. Two paintings, one unfinished and destined for oblivion, the other finished and hanging in the Louvre.
There is a striking sketch by the great painter Raphael de Zanzio, which proves the theory of the two portraits. Raphael visited Leonardo's studio in Florence when he was painting the Mona Lisa. Amazed by the work, he created an identical sketch. There are two differences between this drawing, which is also at the Louvre, and Leonardo's famous portrait. First, the two columns that rise up to the sides of the figure. The absence of these columns in Leonardo's work could be explained by the fact that the painting was, presumably, trimmed down in later centuries until it reached its current dimensions, 53 by 77 centimeters. The second difference, however, is more striking. The woman in Raphael's sketch has well-defined eyebrows.
Two Greek columns appear behind the lady, columns that are suspiciously absent in the Louvre version of the Mona Lisa. This is further evidence. The Mona Lisa that Leonardo painted between 1503 and 1506 does not exactly match the painting that goes by the name of Mona Lisa or Gioconda, currently hanging in the Louvre.
From the movement of sea waves or birds in flight, I draw the movement of a smile. Leonardo da Vinci. The master spirit drew its inspiration from his pressing need for freedom, a need that meant the constant call to go beyond the limits of the world. That search had two equally dear aspects. On the one hand, to fulfill his dream of flying, and on the other, to give expression to his essential work on canvas. Together, they were the force behind Leonardo.
Who is portrayed in the most famous work of art in the world? The answer touches on the deepest spiritual foundations of the West and bears a transcendent and mysterious truth that leads us once again to Leonardo, the rebel, who speaks out from the silence to undermine our accepted beliefs and confront us with great truths. Let's meet the person behind the name, the Mona Lisa. Let's enter the mind of Leonardo da Vinci. Two paintings, one in the Louvre, the other missing. Two players in a game of likeness and difference, each claiming to be the real one. If the whereabouts of the original painting, inspired by Lisa and described so often by Leonardo's contemporaries, is unknown, then who is in the famous portrait hanging in the Louvre? And why has her identity been kept secret for so many years? Leonardo had never been as busy as he was while painting this work. During this period, he was designing a canal for the River Arno, as well as drawing a series of sketches depicting the Battle of Anghieri. As an artist, he was renowned throughout Europe and was commissioned to do a great variety of work. He was at the peak of his career, the perfect age, the high point of genius and audacity. He felt he could take on any challenge.
Assignments, projects to be carried out, works of art. Leonardo was solicited and in great demand. But his mind was feverish with an idea he had been rummaging for years. Every day, he took notes on the dynamics of birds and the mechanics of the wings in relation to the wind. His next goal was related to another type of art, the art of flight. This time, his tireless measuring aimed at emulating the nature of birds.
Guided by his own obsession, Leonardo came up with thousands of sketches, full of levers and pulleys and formulas. The flying machine had become his greatest goal. The year 1503 is written in his diaries, and alongside in the margin is a phrase, perhaps a piece of advice, or a wish, or better still, a premonition.
Don't tarry further. If your bird can fly, it must do so now. This year, like others, will shortly pass. Leonardo da Vinci.
Unyieldingly, the years went by. Leonardo felt his life slipping away between projects and ideas he had yet to complete. Time raced on, and Leonardo still did not know if his flying machine would work. But one thing was for certain, he had to hurry. For the first time in his life, he wanted more than anything to finish his work and materialize his ideas.
Every night, after placing a protective cover over the portrait, Leonardo studied on for the final test, the one that would allow him to sail the skies. For him, flying was neither a heroic feat nor the solving of a puzzle. It was so much more than that. When he wrote about the flight of the great bird, his words became deep, religious, akin to the sacred. To imitate the flight of birds had become his passion because they are the only privileged beings that live between two dimensions. A portal that Leonardo had sought all his life.
But his obsession was not satisfied with that dream. His spirit asked for more. Capturing the inner sentiments of the woman in front of him became an enthralling experiment. A portrait reveals an individual's soul, and Leonardo dreamed of reflecting Mona Lisa's soul. So day after day, he divided his time between these two great obsessions. Obsessions that in the end gave his life meaning and a burning desire to realize them.
At dusk, Gioconda came to pose for her portrait. It is said that Leonardo da Vinci and Gioconda felt true affection for one another. Leonardo would tell her stories, and Mona would often laugh with him. He surrounded her with poetry, songs, and strange conversation. Meanwhile, his mind struggled to capture the harmonies expressed on that face. He observed her face, the muscles around her mouth.
Facing the contradictions about the version of the portrait hanging in the Louvre, we have to accept that the person in it is not Gioconda's wife, but someone else. Researchers who supported the idea of two versions firmly maintained that both pieces were painted by Leonardo's unmatchable hand. The two pieces may look alike, but they are different, fundamentally distinct. They portray different people, one inspired on the other. So then, if Mona Lisa is not who she's supposed to be, and there is no reliable source that can confirm her identity, then who did Leonardo paint in his most famous work? The ups and downs of this portrait throughout its history are more fitting with a detective novel than with a work of art. Perhaps more information about the piece will point us in the right direction.
Let's take a look at the painting at the Louvre. Mona Lisa's chubby hands, her manner and restful attitude have led to the assertion that she was pregnant. The full bosom, her bearing and the position of her back further support the idea that Leonardo painted a pregnant woman.
Was Mona Lisa pregnant, or had she just lost a baby? Those who deny the possibility that there can be two versions of this painting cannot begin to explain the most simple contradictions. The most famous mouth in the world seems to be asking questions that no one dares answer. When looking at the figure of Mona Lisa, it is frequently asked, for example, why is she dressed so humbly?
In the Renaissance, portraits were painted of figures with enough power and money to pay for them. Indeed, the other portraits by Da Vinci depict noble women and courtesans. The portrait was a document that recorded the status of the noble and evinced his power. Only those who could afford them were painted. So it was that models posed in the most costly, lavish, and arresting clothes.
It's hard to accept that Giocondo, an up-and-coming bourgeois merchant, would allow his wife to be eternalized like a poor woman. And yet the sublimeness of Gioconda's face, her gaze, her famous smile, the serenity of her hands, all contrast with the clothes she's wearing. Isn't this further evidence jumping out at us? And if this is not her portrait, the answer is bold but sure. The most famous portrait in the world is not a portrait, or rather, it is a portrait of Leonardo da Vinci, a self-portrait.
Various investigations have determined the astounding likeness between Gioconda's most significant features and those of the self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. Minute studies of the lines of the face, the expression and the features have been carried out, comparing each brushstroke, each line, each wrinkle, the dark angles, and the twinkle in the eyes of these two works. And links have been found between them.
It's common to assert that artists always speak of themselves and their concerns. They find their inspirations in the threads that tightly bind their work with their sensibilities and the search for their true selves. Hence, the most important portrait in history, the most famous image in the world, is a self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci.
But Leonardo went even further. He delved into his unconscious until he found an image that would allow him to summarize his secret searches, his observations of the world, and his own sensibility. Leonardo summed up his very self. The work that awaits us in the Louvre has been painted from another dimension. Though dressed as a woman, the image is a self-portrait of the artist, a representation that shows us a woman and the soul of a man at the same time, the mirror of the artist in a female version, an ambiguous, plural, and androgynous being, his true essence.
Imagine what would have happened had the Church understood this act of defiance. It would have undoubtedly been seen as heresy, or at the very least, a scandal. Changing sexes, even in a work of art, has been difficult to accept throughout the ages, especially when the work in question is as famous and prestigious as this one is. It would have been logical to try and hide it, to cover it up, with thousands of versions, rumors, and conflicting information. This theory leads us to further questions and hidden messages. Before us is an interpretation of sexuality that opens up a new vision of history and formulates a revolutionary, if ancient, theory of the sexes, a theory in total conflict with Christian dogma and Western values. What esoteric messages are hidden within this self-portrait? In this piece, like in his other works, Leonardo hides symbols. But in none of his other works does he go quite so far. The sacred exaltation of sexual union, the divine superiority of the third sex, love, the mother, the true inner being, the femininity of the universe, all in a portrait just 50 centimeters high. There is little doubt about Leonardo's sexuality. It is known that he never married or had children. It is also known that he surrounded himself with apprentices. Melzi and Salai were with him until his final day. Although many have commented on his homosexuality, none of his biographers has ever mentioned an ongoing relationship. In what mirror could Leonardo reflect his true inner nature?
His relationship with his disciples entailed an almost maternal sexuality, and his relationship with women a distant adoration. Men stirred in him a mix of admiration, pity, and deep skepticism. He felt as if his soul belonged to some other time, a free spirit that sought fellowship and found no companion. Once again, Leonardo's soulmate awaited him beyond the looking glass, on the very threshold of his imagination.
The Mona Lisa is a divinity that Leonardo imagined, emulated and worshipped, and through him, all of humanity worshipped her.
The silent hours that Leonardo spent with Lisa inspired a creative force in him that led him to carry on with his second piece, the immortal one. No one knew at that time of this second piece's existence. The other commissions that he received would have to wait. Like the one from the Duchess of Mantua, who for 15 years had been begging Leonardo to paint her portrait. He preferred to spend his time with the merchant's wife and work on his self-portrait.
The merchant's wife's familiar smile inspired Leonardo. He could not say what it was exactly that enraptured him, but her presence was like a halo that enveloped him as if in a dream. A dream that immersed him in the idea that somehow, through Lisa, he would find Albiera again. Perhaps love is all that childhood leaves us with.
Let's imagine the Vinci countryside during harvest. The small, illegitimate son frolics in his cradle, watched over by his mother, who's working nearby. Leonardo himself used to tell this story. A large bird came to flutter over his cradle, blocking the sun. Later, it perched on the cradle's edge, and with his tail feathers, it began to tickle the baby's lips. When the agitated adults arrived, the child was laughing in delight. The young Leonardo, a friend of the birds.
A dream? A childhood memory? Leonardo did not know for sure. Birds were always on his mind, but the setting he remembered was real, very real. Vinci, the town where he grew up. A hill surrounded by valleys overlooking the River Arno. The shimmering blue sky against a cluster of houses suspended above a valley. There where the birds welcomed him to the world and bestowed him with the first of a long series of questions. How is it possible to fly?
If I can fly, I will be known all over the world and forever remembered. People will look up and gaze at a man with wings. Leonardo da Vinci.
There is a striking but little-known illustration of Leonardo's, a drawing at the Le Mans Museum in France. It was made in 1460, when the artist was only 8 years old. Almost prophetically, the picture shows a young Jesus playing with a kind of toy helicopter, a mechanical bird with a propeller. Is this a natural drawing for an 8-year-old boy who lives in a time when they didn't even know that the world was round? What other visions of the future did the young Leonardo have? And who could understand these visions?
The dream of a journey. For Leonardo, the universe was as wide as his imagination. The dream of birds was infinity's lullaby, slipping into his unconscious mind. Flying birds were his fantasy, soaring up to new worlds. Birds were curiosity itself that tormented him and flew off.
The desire to fly indicates a great longing to overcome earthly barriers and find happiness. It also symbolizes the need to liberate the forces of inspiration and transcend beyond the ordinary.
Luckily, after many frustrated attempts, it seemed that the flying project was on its way. It did not simply entail copying the wings of a bird. After years of study, he had obtained key knowledge on how the center of gravity and air resistance in a falling body interrelated. He was so much aware of these maneuvers, as if he himself had the body of a bird.
When Leonardo returned from his thoughts, he dived into the mazes of the Mona Lisa's soul, searching for an image. For him, this was a similar obsession, trying to express for eternity the face that would convey the mysteries of the soul. Who was Leonardo? Perhaps he hoped that by leaving enigmas and tracks, someone, someday, would understand his true nature.
The great bird will take its first flight from Mount Cecere, which will fill the universe with amazement. Leonardo da Vinci.
Perhaps this androgynous portrait, known as the Mona Lisa, is so transcendent because it brings together so many of its creators, concerns and obsessions.
Leonardo searched for himself with sincerity and dedication, and he expressed himself as an artist. He bared his most intimate longings and his greatest fears for all to see. While he freed his body through his quest for flight, he freed his soul by painting himself as he truly felt. As an androgynous being split in twain, half a being that yearned for his other half and his other sex, the most ancient being, the undivided, father and mother, son and sister.
It contains the sadness of a deep and tormented soul, the grace of a spiritual being, and poverty, the watchful eyes of the mother, and the manliness that will be born from that womb, profound desire and an unlikely secret. Lisa, Albiera, Leonardo's adopted mother, and Leonardo himself.
Perchance Leonardo loved Lisa del Giocondo. His love for her was at a time platonic and ideal. Not only did he observe her and paint her for months on end, he also gave her the gift of his imagination. He is projecting himself on her. he gave her the child that she had lost. And the most beautiful smile in history. The smile that says everything and hides it all. The smile that transcended even the name of Leonardo himself, the universal artist. The Mona Lisa smile.
Many believe they see Buddha's smile in the painting, an expression of peace that grows from harmony and unity with all things. Buddha's smile embodies spiritual perfection, the calm that lights up the universe. It manifests a state of transcendence. Buddha's subtle smile, like Mona Lisa's, displays life's plenitude and an openness to the divine. It contemplates and is contemplated. And in these overlapping visions, a spiritual being and unity are created.
Mona Lisa smile. The ambiguity of her gaze. The effect is a painting whose manifest calm generates a single attention. Leonardo knew how two bodies of water behave when they meet, and how a bird moves when it soars amid two gusts of air. He even knew how two muscles bond in the body. With the Mona Lisa, we are before a face caught at the very moment when two emotions fuse: time and space, sorrow and joy.
We will never know if Leonardo was able to realize his dream and fly. But in his work, he most certainly discovered a flying machine that did indeed take flight. His work has soared through time and human imaginations and become a part of our universal heritage. Thus, with this self-portrait, Leonardo did what no one else was able to. He secretly transcended with a universally famous image that still leaves us with the uneasy feeling we've not understood everything. An unfathomable and classic image, just like the face of its creator.
At the age of 50, Leonardo had lived what might have taken others several lifetimes to experience. Military engineer, architect, lively host, forensic scientist, traveler. Imagining his life requires thankless but necessary definitions, because from Leonardo, one might expect any experience, thought or achievement. As we have proven, the deepest esoteric mysteries echoed in his art, yet he kept very few pieces. The Mona Lisa was certainly one of them. Perhaps his ideas about reincarnation and his admiration of Buddhisms are also in this work. Anything is possible when it comes to Leonardo. His imagination knew no bounds, and the Mona Lisa was, perhaps, his greatest achievement.
The Gioconda, here in the Louvre, encapsulates Leonardo's dream, the perfection of his existence. In the image in front of him on the canvas, the man of the unfinished works discovered the complement that he was missing. But what could have happened to the portrait of Lisa?
Due to the number of activities and commissions he had taken on in those years, Lisa told him she did not think he would finish her portrait. Unfazed, Leonardo defended it. For him, the painting was rest from his mathematical work, and he was certain that he would finish it. But months went by, and Leonardo did not complete the painting. Lisa would repeat time and again that the painter would never finish it.
Lisa was right. Leonardo never finished the work, and it was left, lost in some corner of Europe. Perhaps the annoyed client decided to take it as it was, and it ended up being devoured by time in the corner of some palace. However, the portrait that is on display in the Louvre, the Gioconda, the smiling woman, is perfect and finished. We simply have to assume that it is not the portrait of Lisa. There were two parallel paintings, one that was lost, and the other that expresses the soul of its creator, his spiritual synthesis. Today, 5 centuries later, that painting hangs in the famous museum.